What's up everyone, it's King Moosh here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 15 of Unit Overview. In this series, we'll be analyzing all the playable units in Fire Emblem 3 houses regarding their recruitment requirements, personal abilities, stats, spell lists, and everything in between to determine their strengths and limitations. We also provide a bunch of class recommendations for all these units, as well as rank them on a tier list at the end of our analysis. These videos are generally gameplay focused, so we do our best to avoid story spoilers. We always advise you to watch with discretion anyways. And if you haven't played 3 houses yet, we highly recommend that you do.
This episode will be focused on Annette, Fantine, Dominic of the Blue Lions house. She will join you automatically assuming you choose to teach the Blue Lions house at the start of the game and is deployable in the mock battle. She becomes recruitable out of house in Chapter 2 and has no forced absences, being available for every major battle. The base requirements for Annette are a B Faith rank and a 10 magic stat. This combination isn't exactly the worst due to Byleth having an OK base magic of 6 and a budding talent in Faith. You can also raise Byleth's Faith rank through faculty training with Rhea, Anna, and Manuela, who are generally pretty available. However, B rank Faith is still a pretty hefty ask for a skill that doesn't provide Byleth with the most useful assets. At C rank support with Annette, the requirements become more manageable, going down to C+ rank in Faith as well as an 8 in Magic. C+ support notably lowers the stat requirement to 6 Magic, which matches Byleth's base, so the only requirement you have to worry about from this point on is the Faith rank, which lowers to C. At B rank support, the requirements lower once more, bringing it down to 4 Magic, which is irrelevant, but the Faith rank comes down again to D+. If you want to use White Magic on Byleth, this makes the requirements very easy. However, at this rank, Annette has a chance to randomly ask you to join your house on any given week during your free days, ignoring the requirements entirely. This is generally our preferred method of recruitment, since not only do you not have to raise Byleth's Faith rank, you can save over the week and reset it as many times as you want until the RNG falls in your favor. In order to be able to reach Annette's higher support ranks, there are a fair amount of methods to do so. If you are able to give her gifts, Annette has a few as one that she prefers, those being the Book of Sheet Music, Stylish Hair Clip, Arithmetic Textbook, and Owl Feathers, which are enjoyed by all units. Another great way to improve her support is by finding and returning her lost items. In Chapter 3, her first one becomes missing, the School of Sorcery book, which can be found in the dining hall. Her next one won't be available until Chapter 9, which is her unfinished score found in the Officers Academy, specifically in the Blue Lions classroom. Lastly, her wax diptych will appear in Chapter 11 and can be found in the dining hall once more. Another great way to raise support is through tea parties, which at the same time can have the added benefit of raising Byleth and Annette's charm stat. To have an easier time with the tea parties, it's advised to use her favorite tea blends, those being the Sweet Apple Blend, Rose Petal Blend, Almond Blend, as well as the Crest Blend and Lester Cortania, which everyone likes. Moving on to her crest, Annette has the Minor Crest of Dominic, which has a very similar effect to Mercedes' crest. It provides her a 10% chance to conserve magic casts, but instead of with recovery magic, it applies to her offensive magic instead. This doesn't increase might or have any other combat-related effect, but it can potentially save Annette a use of her low-use spells like Abraxas or Excalibur, which is much appreciated. Unfortunately, the rate of activation is quite low, and with classes like Warlock or Gremmer, her uses are not too limited, so it's not too impactful compared to some other crests which are more consistent or have stronger effects. Regardless, it at least synergizes with Annette's playstyle for the most part, assuming you keep her in a magic class in the endgame, which is not always the case. The crest itself is associated with the axe relic, Crusher. It has decent stats with 18 might, 60 hit, with 20 durability. This relic has the neat effect of scaling off of magic damage, which allows Annette to do some pretty significant damage with the weapon. Being the bearer of the Crest of Dominic, not only does she not take any damage when wielding the hero's relics, but she also gets an exclusive combat art when using Crusher, that being Dust, which I'll describe in more detail later. Having a crest also means Annette can't take advantage of low HP builds as easily, which is mildly unfortunate, but she isn't the best candidate for them anyways, and she has a couple of unique builds that are strong in their own right.
Annette's personal ability is Perseverance. This is one of several abilities that grant access to the Rally command, which is usable when adjacent to at least one ally. Once she selects an ally to use the Rally command on, that unit receives +4 strength for 1 turn. In other words, Annette effectively has Rally strength built into her kit without needing to train Authority to unlock it, or use one of her ability slots. This is especially valuable in the early game, where an extra 4 points of strength can make a pretty significant difference in whether another unit is able to secure a kill. What makes the ability even better is how well it synergizes with the rest of Annette's kit. She has a boon in Authority and learns several additional Rally abilities as she raises the skill, allowing Perseverance to activate alongside all of them with a single use of the Rally command. Rallying also grants support points between Annette and the affected unit, if applicable, which can be another useful benefit, though it does not grant XP or progress towards class masteries. Rally support does become less valuable as the game progresses and your unit gains access to stronger options. Perseverance is still easily one of the better personal abilities in the game, and gives Annette a very useful supportive niche from the beginning.
Annette has a mildly interesting set of skill levels for a caster. She has 3 boons and 2 banes with no budding talent. While she has no skill modifier for her faith skill, she does have a boon and reason, which is typical for a magic unit. Although having no boost in faith is mildly unfortunate, she at least has a starting rank of D+ reason, which is very good. This means both the low weight spell Wind and reason level 2 are both integrated into her kit from the get-go. This also makes her already quite close to unlocking her second spell at C rank Reason. Arguably her best boon though has to be the Authority one. Authority is a very important skill to rank up fast, as higher authority ranks grant access to stronger battalions with better stats. Not only this, but there are a fair amount of dependent skills that Annette can unlock via ranking up her authority. Her starting rank of E+ is decent, and means that authority level 1 is innate to her kit. Her last boon is for axes, which at service level seems quite strange for a caster to have, as a fair amount of them have a bane for this skill. However, not only is Annette associated with the magic axe relic Crusher that I mentioned before, but bolt axes are quite potent weapons that Annette can take advantage of once she raises her axes a few ranks. She also starts with an E+ rank and axe prowess 1, but this isn't too impactful for her specifically since it takes Annette a while to be a threat with axes. As for her banes, she has one in bows and one in heavy armor. Of these, the bow one is mildly unfortunate considering there are a lot of beneficial classes that require the bow skill to certify for, namely Archer for hit plus 20 among others. The heavy armor bane is not really something worth worrying about at all, as the abilities from it aren't too beneficial for Annette. There aren't too many classes you'd want to certify for her that are armored too, unless you want to potentially take advantage of their defense bases to patch up her bad bulk, which is actually not a bad idea due to the fact that she at least has an axe boon.
Annette's base stats are pretty clearly geared towards her role as a magic-focused support unit. Her most notable stat is her base magic of 11, which is one of the highest starting magic stats among the student units, only falling behind Hubert's 12. This gives her pretty solid damage right from the beginning of the game, especially considering she starts with access to offensive magic immediately. Her dex is also fairly good at 7, helping to keep her attacks accurate, alongside a decent base luck of 6, which also contributes to her spell accuracy. As for gambits, her accuracy scales off a base 6 charm, which is solid relative to most units, but isn't going to be enough for reliable early game gambit consistency. Her speed is a bit more of a concerning stat at only 7. This isn't terrible for the early game by any means, but does mean she'll have a harder time doubling enemies than some of the faster magic users. Arguably, her speed is the best part of her defensive profile though. Annette starts with only 23 HP, which is among the lowest student bases in the game, alongside only 5 defense. Her resistance is surprisingly low for a magic unit as well at only 4, meaning she isn't remotely durable against either damage type at the start. Finally, her base strength of 6 is mostly irrelevant for conventional magic builds, though it does slightly help offset the weight of her spells. Overall, Annette has a strong offensive magic base, but most of her other stats are fairly average or below average, leaving her noticeably fragile in the early game. As for Annette's growth rates, there are a couple strong areas here, but overall they're a bit of a mixed bag. Her most important growth is obviously magic, which sits at a very solid 50%. This is well above average across the cast and pretty standard for the stronger dedicated magic users, although it does fall short of some of the highest magic growth in the game. Her dex is equally impressive at 50%, which is also well above average and helps with both her accuracy and crit rate. Unfortunately, her speed isn't fair nearly as well. At only 35%, it's below average and on the lower end among the game's dedicated magic users, so Annette can have trouble consistently doubling the enemies as the game progresses. Her luck and charm are both fairly average at 35%, while her strength is also 30%. That strength isn't particularly important for her damage output, but does at least help with slightly offsetting the weight of her spells and equipment. Her biggest statistical weakness is definitely her bulk. Annette has an extremely low HP growth of only 25%, which is among the worst in the entire roster, alongside a poor defense growth of only 20%. Her resistance growth of 30% is marginally better, but is still quite unimpressive for a dedicated magic unit. Overall, Annette's magic and dex growth are quite good, but most of her remaining growth rates range from average to poor, particularly her speed and bulk.
Annette only has a couple of dependent combat arts, but both of them are quite good. She only has one that she gets from ranking up her skills, and that is Lightning Axe at C+ axes. For 3 durability, this combat art increases might by 4. While that might seem bad on paper, it has 2 important effects to bring up. First, it scales off of magic, so Annette's damage with this art will scale quite well into the endgame. Additionally, this art also adds 30% of the user's resistance to might, meaning the might boost is actually a bit higher than it seems. Overall, this is a pretty solid art for Annette. If she gets into melee range with an enemy unit and they don't have great res, there's a decent chance she could outright one-round them. While a fair amount of people typically leave Annette in a casting class, non-casting classes with Axe Fair can also help boost the damage of this art even further, making for some pretty fun and unique builds we'll talk about a bit later. The same could also be said for her only other dependent combat art, Dust. This art is exclusive to her relic, Crusher, as I briefly mentioned before. For 3 durability, this art increases might by a whopping 20, while also having the added benefit of being effective against dragon foes, which doubles weapon might in the damage calculation. Dragon foes are quite uncommon, so this effectiveness really isn't that important. It does have an additional effect though of lowering an enemy's defense by 5 for 1 turn when they are struck, but if you're using this art on Crusher, you generally want to be one-rounding the enemy considering how much damage it does alongside Crusher's base 18 might. If an enemy boss has a significant amount of HP, this relic can be used to do a lot of damage and make subsequent follow-ups do a bit more damage though, which is appreciated. Overall, Annette's combat art list is not deep at all, but she does get one of the better magic combat arts in the form of Lightning Axe, and her own personal magic nuke option with Dust on Crusher. Compared to some other casters, this list is pretty good.
Annette has one of the more interesting sets of dependent abilities in the game, with all of them coming from her authority skill. At D authority, she unlocks rally resistance, which grants an ally +4 resistance for one turn whenever she uses the rally command. This is highly situational and probably won't stay in a long-term build, but it can still be decent early on, so it applies alongside perseverance and any of Annette's other rally effects. At C authority, she gets battalion renewal, which restores up to 30% of her max HP at the start of each turn, whenever her battalion is at 1/3 endurance or lower. This ability is pretty bad in general and is especially poor fit for Annette, who ideally should not be taking enough damage for passive healing like this to matter. At C+ authority, Annette gets by far the most important ability in this list, Rally Speed. This grants +4 speed to an ally for one turn, and because it stacks with perseverance and rally resistance, Annette can provide several useful stat boosts with a single action. The speed boost is especially valuable because it can push allies over important doubling thresholds, giving Annette one of the strongest early and mid-game rally packages in the game. Reaching C+ authority should be heavily prioritized when training Annette, especially since her authority boon makes this benchmark relatively easy to reach. At A authority, Annette learns Battalion Wrath, which grants +50 crit during the enemy phase while her battalion is at 1/3 endurance or lower. This is a very strong effect in theory, but Annette is a pretty awkward user of it. Her wind spells at least have fairly solid innate crit rates, so there's some natural synergy there, but magic users generally get the short end of the stick when it comes to Battalion Wrath. Spells have limited uses, which is a major problem for enemy phase setups that may need to counter several enemies in a single turn. Also, Annette can't effectively utilize killer weaponry during the enemy phase because they skill off her much lower strain stat instead of her magic. More importantly, effective Battalion Wrath setups generally rely on either dodge tagging or prod tagging to survive the enemy initiating combat. Annette is poorly suited for either approach due to her mediocre speed and terrible bulk. This makes Battalion Wrath a pretty sketchy option for her despite how powerful the effect itself can be. That being said, we are both pretty inexperienced with using enemy phase mages, so if you have any suggestions for making it work better, please let us know. Finally, at S rank authority, she learns Rally Movement, which increases an ally's movement by 1 for the remainder of the turn. Movement is very important, of course, but this sounds more impressive than it actually is. S authority is an extremely high investment requirement, and by the time you reach that point, there are already plenty of other strong movement tools available. Rally Movement still has some value because it can stack with all of Annette's other rally effects, but on its own, the benefit is fairly modest, to the point that it's often jokingly compared to Shove. Overall, Rally Speed is easily the standout ability here, while the rest range from situational to fairly underwhelming on Annette specifically.
Annette has quite a number of spells to cover given that she is often pictured as a dedicated caster. Starting with her Reason spell list, she innately has Wind in her kit thanks to her starting rank of D+ Reason, as I mentioned prior. We think Wind's reliability makes it a great starting spell, boasting 100 hit, 10 crit, 12 uses, and having a measly 2 weight. The only weak area of this spell is the low might of 2, but a majority of the low weight spells don't really have that much might anyways. The reliability in the early game is a lot more important given how inaccurate attacks can be at the beginning of a playthrough. At C rank Reason, Annette gets the next spell in the Wind list of spells, Cutting Gale. This spell retains the good qualities of Wind, including reliability, while giving a bit of a boost to might. It has 6 uses, which is okay for a medium weight spell, alongside 7 might, 95 hit, 10 crit, and 5 weight. Unfortunately, at B rank Reason, she gets a relatively redundant spell, Sagittae. While having more casts of a mid-tier spell is not a bad thing, it more or less functions the same as Cutting Gale. It has the appreciated 10 uses, but has the same might of 7 with slightly less crit and hit at 5 and 90 respectively. It also weighs slightly more at 6. If you are getting a lot of offensive value out of an Annette, the extra spells might be nice, but it's more of a luxury than anything too particularly useful. Annette gets one more spell in her Reason list at rank A, that spell being Excalibur, the ultimate wind spell. This spell bolsters pretty decent might at 11, while remaining wholly reliable at 15 crit and 100 hit. It also has 4 uses and 8 weight, which isn't too terrible for a late game spell. The main appeal of this spell has to be the effectiveness it has against flyers, though. For spells and weapons, the effective property triples the weapon or spell might in the damage calculation. This basically means against flyers, Excalibur has a base of 33 might, which is very high for a spell. Flyers are also one of the best things to be effective against, considering how threatening they are with their effective range and good stats. Beyond that, we have her Faith spell list, which isn't too deep compared to some other casters. At rank D and D+ Faith, Annette acquires the generic white magic spells Heal Nosferatu like every other unit. Heal gives Annette basic white magic healing, which requires adjacency to cast, while Nosferatu is a low might offensive white magic spell that heals the caster half the damage dealt with it, rounded down. After that, Annette gets Recover at C rank Faith, which serves as an upgraded version of Heal. The might is increased by a fair amount, which allows for higher healing numbers. On top of Annette's good magic, this spell is capable of healing a single ally a decent amount, but still requires adjacency. Her last Faith spell is unlocked at A rank, and it's the offensive spell Abraxas. It has pretty solid stats across the board, bolstering 14 might, 90 hit, 5 crit, with the 2 downsides being the heavy weight of 13 and only having 2 uses. It's a pretty strong spell and preferable to something like Aura, but honestly, just like all spells, it has a tendency to fall off in the late game, and the 2 uses it has isn't doing it any favors. Overall, for a dedicated caster, Annette's list isn't too spectacular. It lacks utility on the Faith side, which is the main detrimental factor here, while on the Reason side, she at least has the full wind spell tree, making her magic at least reliable at all stages of the game. I'd say her standout is definitely Excalibur, as eliminating flying threats quickly is a good niche to have.
Annette has a very solid collection of strengths that allow her to contribute in multiple different ways throughout the game. The most important one is easily her rally utility. As we mentioned earlier, Perseverance essentially gives her rally strength for free, and we think is one of the best personal abilities of the game. A +4 strength boost is extremely impactful during the early chapters, and Annette can quickly combine this with rally speed once she reaches C+ authority. The Blue Lions have plenty of units that appreciate both these boosts, with Felix being possibly the best candidate. Even when Annette is recruited to another house, there will always be strong offensive units who benefit from these boosts. This makes her an excellent contributor from the very beginning of the game, and the utility remains relevant throughout the entire playthrough. The combination of rally strength and rally speed is also almost completely unique to Annette. Ignatz is the only other unit who actually obtains both, but he doesn't learn rally strength until S authority, while Annette can have both effects available within the first few chapters. Her skill affinities also complement this role extremely well. An authority boon is one of the best boons a unit can have, allowing Annette to unlock her rally abilities faster, while also giving her earlier access to stronger battalions throughout the game. Her axe boon is similarly valuable, and especially unique for a magic-focused unit. It lets her make effective use of options like Lightning Axe and the Bolt Axe, while also making it easier for her to access classes with Axe Bear later on. Annette also benefits significantly from her Azure Moon exclusive paralog with Gilbert, Weathervanes, and Fodlan. Completing it rewards Crusher, the hero's relic axe associated with the Crest of Dominic, which deals magic-based damage and is easily at its best when used by Annette. As mentioned earlier, it also gives her unique access to the combat art Dust. The paralog additionally rewards the School of Sorcery Soldiers Battalion, which is another very useful option for Annette and other magic units thanks to a strong boost to magic tech and hit, alongside access to the offensive gambit Resonant Flames. Combined with Lightning Axe and the Bolt Axe, Crusher further solidifies Annette as most likely the best magic axe user in the game. She also has two special might supports, one with Mercedes and one with Gilbert, giving her another way to improve her damage through linked attacks or adjutant support. Overall, Annette is a very strong all-around unit because she combines some of the best early game utility in the game with generally effective offensive options. Her rally strength and rally speed combination lets her contribute immediately, while her magic-based axe build gives her in combat that generally scales much better in the late game maddening than relying on conventional spellcasting.
We think Annette is a pretty solid unit, but she definitely has some flaws worth examining. First off, we generally think that her spell list is mediocre across the board. While she has some solid early reason spells and a good ending spell too, most of the letdown comes with her phase spell list. In the majority of cases, spells unfortunately fall off much later in the game, and good utility is what keeps a lot of casters relevant into the late game. Annette only gets adjacent healing, and that's it. She has no other form of utility, since her only other phase spell is Abraxas. While it's an okay spell, the phase side of the list really lets her down, and I don't think I emphasized it enough earlier. Her actual utility comes mostly in the form of her rallies, which generally are pretty good and very strong in the early game. However, the main issue with them is that they don't provide unit XP, which means it's completely possible Annette falls behind in this department depending on how much you decide to rally. There are some pretty great receivers of rallies in-house for the Blue Lions, namely Felix and Dimitri specifically. If you take advantage of them early on, Annette can definitely lack a few levels after a period of time. So while her actual utility is good, there is still a notable downside to it. Annette is also not a great unit statistically in all honesty. As per usual with casters, she has very bad bulk and strength, but there are really no other standout stats aside from her magic and her dex being pretty solid as well. For a magic unit, her res isn't even particularly noteworthy, and her speed is definitely lacking despite the fact that she possesses some lighter spells. Overall, she has two areas where she definitely excels a bit, but she isn't completely min-maxing them either, which leaves a lot to be desired as a collective. Lastly, I wanted to mention Annette's Bowbane. While this isn't particularly too worrisome for her, given that she has accurate wind magic and the ability to acquire Uncanny Blow later, any issues acquiring accuracy boosters, i.e. the Archer Mastery hit plus 20, is mildly unfortunate given the accuracy of axes are not great, especially the bolt axes she might be inclined to use.
As for Annette's beginner class, Monk is the obvious choice. She starts with D+ reason, so she can certify for it with 0 additional investment, and it's also the only beginner class that allows her to continue using her spells. Its mastery ability, Magic plus 2, is easily the most useful of the 4 stat boosting beginner abilities for her, directly improving the damage of both her spells and her magic-based axe attacks later on. Monk also gives her drawback upon mastery, which is a very useful positional combat art that like remain equipped for most of the game. Annette really doesn't have many other combat arts competing for those slots outside of Lightning Axe, so there's very little reason to ever take drawback off. Moving into the intermediate classes, Mage should be heavily prioritized and is really the only class we would recommend actually using for the majority of the stage. It's Annette's easiest certification thanks to her starting Reason Rank and Boon, it allows her to continue using her spell list, and most importantly, mastering it gives her Fiendish Blow. This grants plus 6 magic whenever she initiates combat, providing a massive boost to her player phase damage that will remain important for essentially every offensive build she can run. Her other conventional options are much less appealing. Priest is the only other immediate class that allows spellcasting, but Annette's mediocre phase spell list gives her very little reason to use Priest over Mage. Break-It is another easy certification because of her Axe Boon and starting E+ rank, but Deathblow only increases strength, and therefore doesn't help the magic-based damage that Annette actually wants to deal. Archer's hit plus 20 would certainly be useful for her, especially for some of her less accurate axe options, but getting there requires pushing through her bowbane. There's also a much more convenient accuracy boosting mastery available to Annette later that we'll discuss when we get to the DLC classes. There are still a few intermediate certifications worth considering, even if you don't actually plan on using the classes. Armor Knight can be surprisingly useful for Annette because certification will permanently raise her defense to the class's minimum if her Kurosawa is lower. She does have a heavy armor bane, but the axe requirement is extremely easy for her, and you get a fairly reasonable certification chance without raising heavy armor all the way to the listed D requirement. The earlier you certify, the more defense Annette is likely to gain from it, so this is worth considering as soon as she reaches level 10. Thief can serve a similar purpose for her speed, although reaching the required sword rank is a significantly larger investment. For both these classes, you only care about the certification bonuses. There is no reason to actually spend time using them in battle. The last intermediate class worth considering is Pegasus Knight, which Annette could access because she is female. It offers fantastic mobility with 6 movement, flight, and canto, which can be extremely useful for positioning and rally support and eventually your offensive axe options. It requires a decent amount of investment since she is neutral in both lances and flying, but using this class also gives her additional flying experience that can help prepare for later flying classes. As mastery ability, Darting Blow is another potentially valuable reward, granting plus 6 attack speed whenever Annette initiates combat, and helping compensate for her mediocre natural speed. There are some major drawbacks though. Pegasus Knight cannot use magic, early game flying battalions are very limited, and rallying does not give Annette any progress towards class mastery. This makes actually utilizing and mastering Pegasus Knight difficult unless she already has access to Lightning Axe or a magic weapon like a Bolt Axe, which can really only be obtained early through the Pagan Altar if you have the DLC. If you only care about obtaining Darting Blow, another option is simply attaching Annette as an adjutant while she's in Pegasus Knight, allowing her to gain the mastery that way.
As for advanced class options, Annette has a few that you could utilize. The first obvious choice is Warlock, mainly if you do not have the DLC. It's a solid casting class, granting both Black Tome Fair and Black Magic uses ×2. This helps Annette be more sustainable with increased casts, and also gives her more damage alongside the magic boost that this class provides. The class is also pretty easy to certify for Annette given her boon and high starting rank and reason. This applies to most of the classes after this, as they all require reason for at least one of the certification requirements, with the exception of one. Warlock unfortunately has bad move, which is the reality of a lot of magic classes, but without access to Darkflyer and Valkyrie, this is probably your best option for spellcasting. However, if you do have the DLC, then Valkyrie is something we believe should be certified for first, or at the very least as soon as possible so Annette can pick up its mastery, Uncanny Blow. This serves as a generally more useful and potentially easier to acquire alternative to hit plus 20. Raising bows is pretty much nothing for Annette unless you want to make her a magic sniper, but generally this is pretty difficult given her bane, and she has plenty of other options. Valkyrie itself is a good class outside of the mastery too. For her casting class, its move is quite good, while also bolstering long effective range thanks to the class ability Black Magic Range +1. The move being better than most of the casting classes is mainly relevant for Annette's rallies, as they require adjacency and are easily her best forms of utility. This applies to Valkyrie, as well as any of the other mounted classes I'm about to list. Valkyrie can also serve as a transitional option for Dark Knight, since the boost to riding this class grants is a good asset for Annette since she doesn't have a boon for the skill. One last notable point about Valkyrie is that it has a magic boost of 4, which is tied with Dark Bishop for the highest magic boost in the advanced stage. Dark Flyer is also a good option for Annette as well, granting her Black Tome Fair and the best mobility for a caster with Flight, Canto, and 7 move. She doesn't really have any amazing spell utility to take advantage of while in this class, but offensively it's a pretty solid option for her and can be endgame viable. Since she isn't the most optimal Dark Flyer by any means, it makes her hard justifying giving her the only flying magic battalion present in this game, and as such, if you have a better candidate for this class in your army, I'd advise against making Annette a Dark Flyer. Our personal favorite class, and what we also deem one of her better builds, is Wyvern Rider Annette. Her Axe Boon makes this class not too difficult to reach, and grants her quite a few useful assets when she can actually certify for it. Firstly, Wyvern Rider of course has better move than vast majority of the casting classes, with 7 move, Flight, and Canto. The only other one that can compare is Darkflyer, which has the same mobility. While Annette obviously does not have good strength, the main appeal of this class is Bolt Axe, Lightning Axe, Crusher, as well as Dust, all being things boosted by Axe Fair that scale off of magic damage. Bolt Axes specifically are pretty essential to this build, as it allows Annette to keep a threatening ranged option despite losing access to her spells. Her spell utility isn't great, and while her reason list is fine, we believe sacrificing it for this build is a worthwhile trade-off. This is especially true given that while in Wyvern Rider, Annette can still maintain access to her rallies, and use them just as well as Darkflyer given they both have excellent move, and can more than likely reach most of her allies in a map on any given turn. In regards to master classes, there are a few that Annette can use which are mostly improvements over the advanced classes that we recommended. One such example would be the Wyvern Lord, as it really is just a quality of life for Annette rather than something that is necessary to acquire. The stat boost improvements aren't too impactful, especially the strength boost since it's hardly a stat that she needs. Other than that, it does give 1 extra move and avoid plus 10, which is nice to have. The certification requirements for the class are a bit steeper, and if you're struggling to reach Wyvern Lord, again, Wyvern Rider is perfectly serviceable for her. I also brought up Dark Knight earlier, and it finds itself a mention here too. It has Black Tome Fair, which supplements Annette's magic damage while having slightly better move than Valkyrie. Although the magic boost is slightly worse, the Tome Fair it has makes up for the slightly lower boost, while Dark Knight has notably better boosts across the board. Since Azure Moon is also a very friendly route towards cavalry, this is arguably Annette's best mounted class if you want to retain axes to her spell list. Lastly, I want to mention Gremory, but honestly it isn't too impactful for Annette specifically. Since Annette utility comes from her rallies, leaving her in a low move class in the endgame is not a great decision in our opinion. Gremory itself is a fine class, but the strength of it is determined mainly on if a unit's spell list is strong or not. In terms of Annette, as we have said before, her spells aren't the best. Although it may sound like a broken record, Annette's Faith utility is pretty much non-existent, and her offensive options for spells are pretty solid, but nothing worth writing home about. Her best master classes are easily Wyvern Lord or Dark Knight.
As for Annette's tier placement, we've actually decided to split the B tier into B+ and B-, and we think Annette fits pretty comfortably to the B+ tier. This puts her above Hubert, but still below Ferdinand in our rankings. I think this is a placement that a lot of people won't completely agree with, since Annette has some of the most variants we've seen on tier lists. A lot of that comes down to how highly you value her rally utility, and for us, rally strength and rally speed are valuable enough to put her around here. This placement basically averages together her in-house and out-of-house performances, so we think she's a little better with the Blue Lions. She only gets Crusher and Gilbert as a might support at Azure Moon, both of her might supports are actually in-house, and the Blue Lions have several excellent rally targets. She is still a very solid unit when recruited elsewhere, but we think these advantages make her noticeably better in-house. As for builds, our favorite endgame option for Annette is a Magic Axe-focused Wyvern Lord, though Dark Knight and Darkflyer are both great options if you want to retain her spell list. For the Wyvern builds, we start with Rally Speeds, which can maintain her most important support utility. Fiendish Blow is an obvious addition for improving her player phase damage. Uncanny Blow gives her a massive accuracy boost when initiating combat, which is particularly valuable with the lower accuracy of axes. We also run Axe Prowess level 5 for even more accuracy, along with Magic +2 as a simple boost to her overall damage. That being said, the slots for Axe Prowess 5 and Magic +2 are very flexible and can be easily swapped for any of the honorable mentions depending on your specific needs. Rally Movement and Rally Resistance can provide some additional support, Darting Blow can help her reach certain doubling thresholds against lower enemies, and Axe Crit +10 is another good offensive option that pairs well with her high dex growth. The Dark Knight and Dark Flyer setups are very similar. We still recommend Rally Speed, Fiendish Blow, and Uncanny Blow. Uncanny Blow is particularly nice here because unlike Reason level 5, it improves Annette's accuracy with everything, allowing her to freely switch between spells and magic axes depending on the situation. Black Magic Range +1 takes the 4th slot and makes her relatively short-range Reason list much more flexible. Finally, we recommend Movement +1, especially for Dark Knight since she already needs to heavily invest into riding. It's much less convenient to obtain for Dark Flyer, so Magic +2 is a perfectly good replacement. Reason level 5 is another honorable mention if you want to focus more heavily on her spells, alongside Rally Movement and Rally Resistance. Darting Blow is arguably more useful in this version of the build as well, particularly for Dark Flyer. Her spells are generally lighter than the Magic Axe she would otherwise be attacking with, making it more realistic for the extra attack speed to actually let her double. Both builds ultimately play pretty similarly. Annette uses her high mobility to keep up with the rest of your army and rally allies whatever that is the most valuable use of her turn. When she needs to attack herself, Wyvern Lord focuses almost entirely on Lightning Axe, Bolt Axes, and Crusher, while Dark Knight and Dark Flyer can freely alternate between her spell list and Magic Axes. We generally prefer Wyvern Lord because her Magic Axe damage scales better into late game maddening, but all three classes let her combine strong player phase combat with the rally utility that makes her valuable throughout the entire game. That's about all we have to say about Annette. If you enjoyed the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. Stay tuned for the next episode of Unit Overview, which is about the next member of the Blue Lions house, Sylvain Jose Gautier, on Jeff's channel this Saturday. Thanks for watching.
Ready or not? What's done is done.